Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this monthly customer webinar. Today we're going to be talking about best practices and tuning tips for CylanceOPTICS. And before we get started, we'll have just a little bit of housekeeping. Today we are shooting for an approximately 60-minute long webinar. Everyone's phones are going to be muted. And these slides and the recording will be made available in the community about 72 hours after this webinar finishes. You can post your questions from this webinar into the community. Just log into your Protect console and go to support.cylance.com. Just a tip, if you wait until the webinar is posted and post your questions as comments to that post, we can keep them all in one place and get them answered for you. There's also going to be a webinar survey. Please be sure you fill that out, especially where you let us know what future topics you'd like to see. Okay, and we have two speakers today. Our presenter is Dave Alfaro. He's the Worldwide Managing Director of ThreatZERO here at Cylance, and we're very fortunate to have a special guest speaker from Pulte Financial Services, Mr. Jack Callahan, their Senior Security Engineer, who will come and talk to us a little bit about his own experiences. So without further ado, Dave, if you're ready to go, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Summer. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Today, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about, best practices and tuning for CylanceOPTICS, and also get a little bit of a customer feel and a customer perspective from our friend Jack. So, kind of jumping right into it, I thought it best to discuss a little history on really Cylance and what we do and why we do what we do. So that said, given this little history, in 2012, we were pretty much operating in a state of mediocrity. So for 20 years plus, right, we were dealing with really, really poor efficacy from a malware detection perspective. Anytime anyone had a new piece of malware out there, in order for it to be identified properly, we had to have essentially a sacrificial lamb. Somebody had to get hit and send it into the antivirus companies in order to, get a signature out there. And then we had to do the whole rigmarole of basically deploying this out, and in small environments, it's not a big deal, but when you have 10,000 endpoints, it becomes a very big deal. So we really started to look at, hey, wait a minute, there's got to be a better way. And a gentleman by the name of Ryan Perma started thinking about this. So we started looking at efficacy rates and how we were all dealing with malware and virus attacks and these sort of things. And, we really saw efficacy rates of 60% or less. And really we started thinking, is 60% ever really good enough? Well, the big brains on Mr. Ryan Perma did not agree with that. And this is where we thought, listen, we need to take a better approach. It's time for a change. We need a better way to look at this. So in 2012, started hatching this idea of, utilizing mathematical models to actually detect this malware. And really, math is greater than malware when you think about it. So started looking at that, and when we took a bit of a different approach in Cylance Protect, we started looking at the DNA or really what made up a malicious qualities of device are equated to prevention, being ahead of the attack, being to where we would identify this stuff straight away based on its qualities, and then from there being able to detect it pre-execution, so not after the fact, not after somebody got completely owned, right? So we really started looking at that and found a lot of success. And we're going to hear from Jack here in a little bit. And he was pretty much an early adopter, or not pretty much, he was very much so an early adopter. And again, bought into it and really saw what we were trying to do with doing things a little different. And what it really came down to is just doing things right. And in that same era, a gentleman by the name of Corey White started working on really some services and how we can, leverage and harness this new technology and really help people get the true value out of it. He then brought in myself, and we kind of hatched ThreatZERO, right? And what ThreatZERO was designed around was doing it right. So, a little background on me, I spent a long time, as an admin and working on firewalls and these sort of things, and, just became pretty much a career consultant from there, and really just wanted to do things right. You can always go in and install something, but if you have, a messy environment around it, whatever it is you're putting into place is not really going to be as effective as you want it to be. So really, Corey and I took that approach on just doing things right and really approaching things with an objective-based approach. So really delivering an outcome with what we did. Now, from there, fast forward to 2017, we started to launch optics because we saw value in EDR and in visibility and bringing context above that prevention and above that outcome. So this is really kind of that timeline of where we went in, and what it all comes down to is doing things right. Doing our best to make sure that the outcome, and really the outcome when it pertains to Cylance, is prevention that makes the experience that our customers and partners have. And really coming back to it, it's all about doing things right. It's getting to that outcome and taking that different approach of, listen, we can get this installed or we can get this operationalized, but is it really tuned? Is it really humming? And are our customers really getting the outcome? Because what's the outcome we're after? The outcome is really that ROI, and the outcome when you're talking about EDR and prevention is not having to worry about this. The outcome and that experience is the next time a WannaCry, or the next time NotPetya or Petya, or one of these major attack hits, where you can, instead of going into a perpetual motion of reactive, actions, to really let the software and let the solutions do what they're designed to do and just prevent that and be ahead of the attack. So, speaking towards that visibility and really our approach to EDR. We came out with optics, and we put optics out, and Jack again was kind of an early adopter with this as well. But when we talk about EDR can be complex, right? And another thing about EDR is not the only answer. It's not set it and forget it. It's not the only thing that you need when it comes to basically making sure that you're proactively protecting things and proactively gaining that visibility. It's a portion of that stack, right? And really what EDR is all about, and what CylanceOPTICS is all about, is really surfacing interesting data through context and correlation, really. So bringing visibility to the different components and what's going on within the environment. And really our different approach with CylanceOPTICS is to be on the host and operate at the host, right? Because this is where attacks occur. So if we start to look at, operationally where things are executing, yes, there are network components and things like this. And again, this is why I mentioned that EDR is not the end all be all. It is a component to that stack. But really being at that host and being ahead of the game is, with that context, we're able to, have basically at the host a zero latency decision and action component that really takes effect where the attack is in effect, not necessarily at the gateway, but before it gets to the point, and really providing not only that layer of prevention on the foundation, but also that visibility as to what's going on. So, speaking more to EDR, EDR, as we introduced it, like I said, brings that visibility and that context to an attack that's happening, or basically surfaces interesting data so that you can actually look into it. But if you don't have a trained eye, it's really kind of tough to extract the value from it. You need to know what you're looking at. You can't necessarily take someone really new to security and things like this and have them, utilize an EDR and really get the most out of it, right? Because EDR can definitely be noisy, and at the end of the day, it needs to be tuned, right? And optics is really no exception. So, it needs to, number one, have a proper foundation. If you just plug in an EDR tool and just are getting, every alert that surfaces, every time Marge installs the app toolbar, you're going to have a SOC analyst that's there, trying to field this event, and really the minutia and the noisiness of that is really going to be a poor use of those, essentially, some very expensive human capital. If y'all haven't looked out there, the job market for security really isn't that bad right now. So when you're talking about a trained SOC analyst or a tier 2 analyst, someone that's really going to look at an EDR and be able to extract and really deliver value from it, they need to be able to filter the noise. And that's exactly what we wanted to do with ThreatZERO. So ThreatZERO for quite some time has been helping customers actually tune, protect, and get to a foundation of prevention. On that, since its initial release, we started supporting optics in the same fashion. So making sure that the customers are utilizing a set of best practices and implementation so that ongoing they can actually manage this and really get value out of it, which goes back to that initial component of doing things right. Getting customers to where they're understanding what's going on and helping our customers in ThreatZERO or even outside of it if they're doing it on their own to help them get the most out of the solution. So speaking to a little bit of the theme of today, we really started executing these best practices in I'd like to at this point start to introduce Jack. And Jack from Pulte, like I said, is kind of a friend of the family, and we recently paid a visit to him, the ThreatZERO team, and a couple of my top engineers, as well as Summer and some people from our customer success organization as well. And we reached out to Jack to kind of get his experience and kind of where he was at, right? And really, what we wanted to do is just kind of ask Jack, what was your experience, or what was your kind of initial take on that? So first and foremost, let Jack introduce himself. But really, the question I want to throw to you, Jack, is, what was your initial take on optics and your initial feel and experience that you had? So that said, everybody, Jack Callahan is, like I said, a friend of the family and definitely an industry veteran. At this point, Jack, let me go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Definitely, I've been in the industry for a long time. I meet a lot of people when I say I've been in 30 years plus. They go, really? I wasn't born then. You get kind of embarrassed. But that is life. To give you a quick recap of me, if possible, old guys talk forever. I began my environment in clinical psychology, and back then we called cybernetics what today is called general artificial intelligence. It was quite an experience that sort of thrust me out into the world where my work got me in a pretty broad environment. I was doing it both in business, I was doing it for the federal government, I even did some stuff internationally. I sort of dove into the space. As a matter of fact, working in an old computer Fortune 100 company got me into the place where, well, if you knew something about security, you were sort of the security expert. There you go. And so since 1983, I've been kind of fighting this battle. Back then, when we were developing the original SIMs and the original intrusion prevention systems, definitely got a good feel for what this was going to be like and sort of an inkling of what the future was bringing. I liked one of your points earlier, Dave. Alarm fatigue and alert fatigue is a great thing. When you bring up a SIM and think, this is great. When you write the code, it's wonderful. until you get 10,000 alarms in the space of about an hour, and suddenly you realize it's time for thresholds and tuning. And it definitely plays into the concept of building a good SOC and having something that allows you to distill the information. You don't want to know that somebody attacked you 10,000 times. You want to know what the threat is and where it came from, and at least be prepared to carry on some sort of defense. Which brings me to my life today. Currently, I'm the senior SOC engineer at Pulte. We're financial services, our name speaks to. And our key interests, our key elements are the protection of data and privacy information, then obviously financial. And so we've been very focused on creating a very dynamic SOC environment. We have a limited team. Our parent company, who's much bigger and owns us, Pulte Group, who builds homes, they have a team of about a dozen people. We're a team of 3 or 4 folks. And it's been essential for us to engage reasonable and logical tools and get the most out of them that we can, which is also one of the reasons why we've been an early adopter of many things. Because we want to know what the leading edge is, we want to understand what's occurring and play in that part. And having developed this kind of software before, I make both a good and a bad client. It's like a doctor being a patient of a doctor. You have benefits and you have deficits. That being said, the last thing I'll point out is, as you also get older, you want to make sure you share that information with other people. So I'm a teacher and a mentor here in the Colorado area, which is where I'm located, to make sure that when I finally retire and get a bait shop with a manual cash register, I'm going to have people in place who will pick up that gauntlet and keep on moving. So that's kind of my background, if I will. I know that we're going to be talking about how Cylance really worked for us, what brought us to it. I mean, we did a POC early on for us in 2017. In other places that I've worked at, I'd been aware of Cylance as early as Cylance V. And that's when I knew that this was going to become a good answer. I mean, everybody trusted and loved the fact that if the DAT files got out quickly enough, I love that, David, and at least one sacrificial lamb got hit in the morning, then all of us might have a chance of not getting hit later. But it was essential. I mean, we had to have indicators of attack and compromise, and they had to be computed in such a way that we could intuit what was coming, not wait for it to hit and respond. And that was one of the things that really drew me to Cylance during the POC, because I knew that I could trust it. I knew that what it was finding for me were intuitions into the space, not just positives or negatives, but I could deduce what was occurring. And fitting that in together with some of the other tools in our environment and our SIM, I could now have an intuition sufficiently to understand, was somebody paying attention to us? Was this just script kiddies brute forcing us? Or was this a dedicated, focused attack coming our way? Anything else I can answer?
Yeah, so just maybe elaborate a little bit for us on that, initial experience specific to optics.
When we first saw it, I mean, I looked at similar functionality from one of the vendors, some of it which was really crazy. What I was amazed with optics is that it was very pointed. It brought up information directly related to what we were doing. So, and of course, as you pointed out, we kind of evolved with it. We went through 1 or 2 releases as it coalesced into, a focused tool. But we saw the value almost immediately. And it also sort of paid off for us because it relied on the foundation that we'd spent a lot of time establishing with Protect. With any tool that I've ever used, the one thing I always take into consideration is know well the tool, but also make sure that when working with the vendor, they know you. Was absolutely essential for us. I mean, we could sit down. I'd spend a lot of time making sure that I got representatives in my business units, understood their business well, because, Protect, if I used it properly, was great for doing things, but I had to make sure I understood what I was seeing, that the hashes that I was being supplied for things were not some in-house software, versus a piece of malware, threat code that had somehow made it in. And so that built for us that when we came to the point that we deployed optics and we began to use the detection rules, and we made the mistake of not crawling, walking, and running. We did what most children you see who can get their feet under them do. We ran and fell flat. We turned on all the rules. We thought we had everything set, and then we had an inundation of detections, some that were relevant, but they were clouded over because we didn't know the right way to tune it. I mean, we did a good job, especially with ThreatZERO's help, to create a good protect environment that built us up to where optics could be paired with it. But it took us a while, and even with the visit that Dave mentioned that we had, we began to see a lot of the things, well, we just turned them all on. It made sense, we'd see what happened. Well, when you turn all the thresholds off and turn all the alarms on, you do find out that you can get 10 or 12,000 events in a week. And you've got a lot to wade through. And it is critical to make sure that your SOC analysts are used appropriately, that they focus in on things and that noise is not distracting them from threat. So it was quite a building process, and it definitely complemented how Protect is working.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it. Interesting perspectives there, and it's a lot of what I hear from the industry. With all of our customers that we touch with ThreatZERO, especially those that are really jumping headlong into optics. And this is a lot of people because EDR is a hot topic right now. To kind of echo some of those, some of that sentiment back, it's a limited team, and managing that SOC and filtering all this data out of a SIEM and whatnot. Those SOC analysts are precious resources, and really it's super important to get the most out of the solutions, both from a protection and an EDR standpoint, and really get that trusted technology. And Jack, you brought up a great point, and what resonated most with me is the Tesla-esque 0 to 60 that we all try to take, right? So again, we want to match the gas pedal and get into it as much as possible. And the deeper the technologists we become, and the more seasoned we become, we tend to be like, I don't need that. I'll go into fifth gear and depress the gas pedal directly. So, that's really where we see some folks that are struggling within ThreatZERO as well, and having some of those same challenges in that, like I said, that 0 to 60 altogether too fast. So really coming back into the focus of today is really those best practices. And what we wanted to share from a technical perspective is the best practices that my team uses when we engage customers, during the ThreatZERO process. So, and let me first start out and say, in ThreatZERO, we apply a ton of experience, and we get more seasoned than most, obviously, because we touch a lot of different environments, and deal with a lot of different challenges. We also happen to be very fortunate to be very close to development and support and these sort of things. So we get some key advantages, but at the end of the day, we're configuring this, and the point of today is to really arm you with some of these best practices, provide you with some of this information so that this can be, something that you can go on within yourself, or, for our partners that are on the webinar as well, things that you can deploy for, for your end customers, and really help deploy some of these same best practices which allow us to bring our customers to a successful status. So thinking about that, really it comes down to a couple key points. Foundation of prevention, right? Making sure that that you're clearing some of the noise. Crawl, walk, run, and Jack, you brought it up, right? That the 0 to 60 doesn't work in, or the Tesla-esque 0 to 60 doesn't work in EDR. You've got to tune it. You've got to start slow. You've got to jump into it. You need to dip a toe in before you cannonball. Further, detection, exception, and responses. We'll talk about those and really kind of best practices around those, and then talk about some of the advanced features that really have made optics shine a bit in the packages and playbooks, and kind of some automated responses to interesting behavior. So without, further ado, jumping into this, and you hear this a lot, and you're going to hear it a lot out of me, and you'll hear it a lot out of, anyone, Cylance for the most part, is really prevention. We say prevention a lot because that is the core of our being. It's the core of what we do, is really laying that foundation of prevention, and it's how optics was designed. It's built on solid ground and a solid foundation of prevention. Like I mentioned, you want to clear up those day-to-day events. Jack brought up alert fatigue, and it is a very, very common problem. The whole point behind Optics being on top of Protect is that with Protect, we get away from the day-to-day nonsense malware commodity stuff that really clogs up a SIEM and things like that. And again, you hear it from not only us, but from our customers and really from the industry as a whole. You need a way to filter out and clear these, the minutia of commodity malware, adware, potentially unwanted programs, all these sort of things. And again, because when you're taking all this data into a SOC and having a really smart and, let's face it, really expensive individual looking at this data and analyzing this data and taking in and saying, where do I want to act and where does it make sense to actually focus this effort, they need that tuning and they need to basically have that foundation of prevention to really be effective. So, looking towards that and our best practices and what we do, number one, build on that solid ground. Get those agents deployed out, right? Just do Cylance Protect first. Now, most of our customers who deploy out will utilize a software deployment tool, and it'll be everything from SCCM to like a Big Fix or even into a GPO or something along those lines. There's really no reason why you should deploy. You should make two packages and things like that. Deploy the MSIs or the XEs first, right? Make sure that they get out into the deployment. But when you get that in there, make sure that the policies have Optics disabled. Optics is designed to analyze and bring out data from these, different processes and different things that are running on the machine, right? What you want to do is make sure that you're not over-analyzing things that can just be dealt with Cylance Protect, right? Also, for those of you who are familiar or maybe even new to Cylance Protect and how we operate, or really Cylance as a whole, you'll know that we do some initial level analysis. So again, we're not signature based or anything along those lines, but we do a bit of an inventory of what's going on with the endpoints. And that becomes, really, and it's not a heavy hit, it's a very lightweight background process. But this is where we're gonna have a little bit of a system impact. But if you have Protect and Optics both trying to analyze the heck out of the machine, right, before you clear the minutia, the day-to-day, the commodity malware, the adware, the pops, these sort of things, right, you're kind of asking a whole lot you're kind of asking a whole lot of that machine. So at that point, really lay that foundation of prevention, get that into a default policy, make those tuning decisions, right, get those threats running with watch for new files and background threat detection, allow that to run and handle those threats, action those items, use the global and local list, get those things handled, then come back in once you've moved into an auto quarantine mode, right? And what we call usually our policy 2. So our policy 1 is going to be essentially default, it's passive only, right? Policy 2 is going to be into auto quarantine, and then start utilizing the memory protection from at least an alerting perspective and get into script control alerting as well. These are very important attack vectors. When you think about, anything that is quote unquote fileless from a malware perspective, or, anything that's doing any level of stack pivoting or RAM scraping or anything along these lines, we're gonna pick this up with memory protection, and these are super important attack vectors to really, help or to prevent against. And memory protection is a fairly easy tune as well. Obviously you want to put it into a passive mode. You want to gather those alerts and then start to make those actions, right? Once you do that, once you get into that auto quarantine and you start, dealing with memory protection and script control, at that point, then enable Optics, because at that point you've taken a big chunk of the minutia out of the way, or out of the noise, and you've limited that noise. and allow optics to start really humming and doing what it needs to do.
Dave, one of the things that I think was really essential for us here was we let those discoveries guide how we wrote policies and guide how we grouped systems. Naturally, our desktops evolved into one policy environment, one zoning, and then our servers into a different one, which also assisted us when we were looking at what was running on them and how they were being used, so that we could tune and be very insightful about how we got into memory protection and script control and how we defended each of them, because they all operated in a different way. So really engaging our business, and a lot of insight that I always think of the two folks that I worked with at ThreatZERO, because of their experience, a lot of their insight helped me look at the picture and decide what to turn on and what to turn off, and also the timing. It was so essential that we didn't, even though we used an older AV, which of course was chewing up 30% of the system when it was really on a run. We installed Protect, and for the short time that it was doing file identification and its short initial run, maybe an 8% spike. And then it dropped down to very low single-digit performance. Even when we finally were ready to bring optics in and had kind of taken our view, added our exceptions, got Protect where we needed it, we never got back to the 30%, even when optics was analyzing a tremendous amount of flow. But they just thought I'd point out that these are the two things that really guided us. One, look at what you've got, know it, tune your policies to the groupings of logical business systems. And then the two folks we work with on ThreatZERO, they definitely could look at us and go, yeah, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Do this. And watch it for 2 weeks. And then once you find out what's going on, you've got an answer tuned to that.
So crawling, walking, running. So when tuning optics, it's imperative that you don't, go 0 to 62 fast. And we have a process that we follow within ThreatZERO that it's really a process of enabling rules. First and foremost, don't go into blocking straight away. Right, you are going to. It's a one-way ticket to heartburn. Right. So that said, when you're going through and you're tuning optics, utilize those official rules and machine learning rules that are enabled for that kind of primary alerting. And again, key word there is alerting. Right. Get to the point to where those detections are simply bubbling up and allow you to analyze and look at them, because this is what EDR is really all about, right? Now, keep in mind at this point, you should already be in that state of prevention, right? You should already be tuned, and as Jack was mentioning, breaking those things out by the different, functionalities and business units and things to help you make these decisions, make easy, educated decisions. Now, these official rules and machine learning rules are, they're fairly, I don't want to say benign, but they are the easiest rules to tune, and they're the most general, right? Get those into essentially a primary alerting mode and start analyzing the data that is coming back. This is where the ThreatZERO team can help, right? But what we do is, as Jack said, let's go put these in place, right? And let them run for a while. Not every process is going to execute like every day or every minute of every hour. And if it is executing every minute, you may want to take a deeper look into it. But, all the same, these processes and things like that surface that are going to be interesting aren't going to happen, or may not be happening with any level of frequency. Give it some time. Let it bake, right? And then from there, things are going to start to surface and whatnot, and decisions can be made on them from an alerting perspective. Enable those exclusion rules as you need. Again, you're going to have to make some exclusions within optics. It's not set and forget. It needs you to make those decisions. It's designed to bubble up interesting activity, and interesting activity isn't always necessarily bad. From there, move into the MITRE attack rules, right? MITRE is where a lot of folks are going right now, and keep in mind as well, this also needs to be tuned with an alerting standpoint, right? Keep in mind, don't go in and every MITRE rule just enable it and go directly into blocking, because what you're going to do is effectively turn your device into a cinder block if that happens, and you don't want to do that, right? So make sure that as you're tuning these attack rules, right, you're choosing different components that apply to the applications and the functionality of that particular machine. The MITRE attack, rules and guidelines are definitely, good and valuable, but they need to be tuned just like anything else within optics. And once you have the official rules and the machine learning, you make the exclusions that are necessary. The attack rules are the next set that you want to start looking at. Once you get through that, and again, crawling, walking, running, these all build on each other, right? The Cylance experimental rules, they're kind of exactly that. They're more in depth. They're designed to surface things like APT and this sort of stuff. So really, really in-depth analysis that is going to surface the obscure. They can be noisy. Right? They need to be tuned. And again, make sure that you lay that on a foundation of not only prevention, but those official rules, the machine learning rules, the exclusion rules, the MITRE attack rules, and then from there, start going into some more of these advanced and customized CAE rules and things like that.
Dave?
Yes.
One thing I would add, we've also taken the kind of perspective, if you will, with optics and with the MITRE rules and some of the other more detailed rules. As we have systems that we question because we got an abnormal or an unsafe Cylance event and it popped up in our SIM, machines that are in a policy that are a regular policy get moved into a policy and into a detection rule set that's much more severe. I mean, we're doubly paranoid. So if there's something we don't quite understand, we turn more detection, more optics insight, more optics scrutiny onto those systems. So it lets us use detection rule sets as more advanced monitoring.
Outstanding. Very cool. Thanks, Jack.
Sure.
So, moving through, some of our best practices that we operate with as well, and again, this is it's so awesome having Jack here taking these, really these best practices and then giving you the real feel and what he's seeing in his environment. I call this kind of following the rules, and it really comes down to, to some level, crawling, walking, running. But the best practices that we take is really to take these detection exceptions and responses and kind of handle them as they come in. So first and foremost, these rule detections are going to produce alerts. It's what they're designed to do. That's why you have an EDR tool, right? At that point, you need to take these detections, and there's going to be lots of them. First thing you need to start doing is once you get into these individual rules, so following what we talked about on the last slide there, going into those, those essentially default rules, and then, going into the MITRE rules after that and these sort of things, get those detections analyzed. From there, the first thing you need to be looking at is making exceptions. You're going to have to make exceptions because you're going to have to allow detections that are hitting on legitimate, valid things. You're going to have to make those exceptions. And really the rules that we put in place are the exceptions. The best practices that we have are really to, number one, name them, be very precise and thoughtful in what you're doing, and be secure in how you're adding them. So when you're naming them, be descriptive. And this kind of goes back to, some old stories from firewalling and these sort of things. If you're going to make rules that are going to be either restrictive or, are going to open things up, document, right? Make sure that you can go back through these exceptions and understand why you did it. Or even more importantly, someone can come behind you and understand, why is this exception there? Right? It's going to save you time. It's going to basically make things make more sense as you go forward. So name them and be descriptive. From here it would be like, again, PowerShell process is spawning, this particular process or something along those lines, right? And you'll know that, hey, listen, this is, for XYZ application, right? It's going to launch PowerShell, and PowerShell is going to spawn, you know, a second level executable or something along those lines. Make sure that it's documented that it's doing that so that when someone comes behind you and sees it, they're going to know what's going on. Also, be precise. Make sure that when you're creating exceptions, you are targeting precisely what you are trying to make the exception for. It's very easy to get caught up in, you know, in making exceptions, and with the addition of a path or something along those lines, really easy to make that have a far broader impact than you may imagine. I guess the moral of the story there is you know, measure twice and cut once. Make sure that you're being exacting and have a second look at, you know, the things you're adding into those exceptions. You know, further, you know, be secure, right? When you're adding in exceptions, you're saying, hey, listen, this is okay, right? Make sure that when you're adding these exceptions, you're actually doing things in a secure fashion, that again, you're not opening up more than you wanted to, going into that, you know, precise comment as well. Last but not least, and Jack can probably talk to this, apply it, right? Make sure that you apply the exclusion to the rule that you want, because it doesn't necessarily do it by default. When you go in and you can create a masterly crafted exception, but if you don't apply it to a detection rule set, it's not going to go into play. So make sure that you know, you're double checking that you're actually applying those exclusions to the rules as you create them. Once you get these exceptions put into place, you're starting to filter down these rules. You're starting to filter down these exceptions. You know, once you get the exceptions in place, now you can start dealing with making these, or you know, adding a little bit of teeth to these rules. So from there, then is when you can start dealing with the responses, right? And the responses are going to be, you know, terminate this process, or you know, move forward with an action, you know, versus an exclusion. And that's really where you want to do that. So keep in mind, detections, right, are going to come into place. Make those exceptions, and then you're going to have a filtered down view at that point in which to start making those rules take action, right? And an action can be or a response, better said, can be anything from, you know, kill that to lock the entire machine down, and you know, you can go further with that within the interface, but really that's going to be the you know, the path you want to take from detections, exceptions, and responses. So Jack, anything to add on detection or exceptions and rule responses?
Sure. A couple things that I learned. First of all, in using the display, the console, it was easy for me to understand how I laid things together, which helped. I think I saw a question from someone that was about naming conventions. The display of how rules are associated, how detections are associated with exceptions and given responses, building them and naming them so you can apply them. It's easier to see them. Obviously, I stretch my screen so I can see all the characters in it, but I try to be as pointed as possible so I know what I want that rule to do. Also, one of the things I make sure of, especially in exceptions, I look for the key element that I think triggered it. Using the console itself, prevention's great. You're always going to have people who bring systems up that don't get protect on them quickly enough or don't get optics soon enough, and something starts to happen, you get that tool deployed. When you see what's going on, if you can find that information, if you can track it, if it rings through as a detection, if you find that this is a new piece of software somebody in Shadow IT added, then you can make an exception for it if it's appropriate. But if it's a threat, or you're on a desktop that humanly never reached the level of protection you want, then you can see those alerts. Then you can respond to them. I mean, I've been very careful as I've moved into optics, because as a security person, you always want to drop the hammer. But you don't want to do that, because if you take the machine offline or lockdown, as opposed to just finding that process, maybe the worst is kill the process. or delete that application. And the thing I always like is I have that information then so I can go to, and it took me a while to figure out the circular charge. That's what we call it around here. But as soon as I understood that I could find not only that detection, but I could find that same, perhaps a SHA for a given file or a running parent process. I could find where else it was going on. That doubled my ability to nail any potential intrusion, even if it didn't make it. Even if it didn't plant malware or carry on a threat, at least I could see it brewing. So this is where optics really began to expose what was going on to me. You can't always assume you're completely protected if they get a foothold enough to try something and protection nails them, then at least if that foothold or the startings of it begins to show up anywhere else, optics gives you that insight across your entire enterprise, which is a great way to step on it. Once you've seen it in one place, you can get it everywhere else. And when you're comfortable, you can start tuning up your responses to go, that's a real threat. When I see it, kill the image, kill the process, kill the parent process, and you can even feel comfortable about taking that final step, which is locking down that machine. So it's been a learning experience there.
Awesome. And, there's 1,000 things that we could talk about within optics, but, you bring up another great one, Jack, there. It's really to understand the impact of a particular detection. And you brought it up, and all I'm thinking is like InSecurity, right? Because at that point, with the InSecurities, you can take like what Jack is talking about, that context that optics is surfacing, and if you're scratching your head on it, right, you may be like, hey, wait a minute, what is going on here? Let's see how widespread this is, and you could dump it into an InSecurity. And InSecurities can be, you can actually, define them to be pretty complex, and that's going back to some of the value of being at the host and really being able to action that and query very quickly. So what you can do is you can take Jack's scenario and blast that out to all your optics agents very, very quickly and see where those hits are, which kind of proves the theory and leads into some level, kind of low-level threat hunting as far as saying, wait a minute, what is the impact of this? Where else is this happening? And getting that data now, not having to go to a SIM and fish it out, right? But simply just asking the agents, hey, are you seeing this, right? And bringing that back. So great points. And if I was to go through every best practice, we'd be here for about 6 hours, right? Which probably I'm going to go ahead and make the bold assumption that no one wants. So that said, great points, Jack, and appreciate that. So, leading on to, the last best practice that we want to put up here, because like I said, we could talk about them, on and on and on. But, great features that we have within the solution that we want people to utilize and that we tune up within ThreatZERO are the packages and playbooks. So the packages are an internal component that we call Refract, right? And with Refract, what we're doing is we're essentially bringing back data. We're giving you the ability to actually deploy out things like, collection scripts or really any sort of scripted component that can go and grab data, right? So what we utilize within ThreatZERO quite frequently, and we have some, kind of pre-built packages that are out there, and they're really pretty easy to modify and script into. But a lot of things we'll do is, and if you think about it, and I'm sure, Jack, you can speak to this quite a bit, but with packages, I mean, how often are you saying, okay, what's going on? As even an admin or, a security level admin, the first thing you're doing is, okay, look at the logs, right? Every time, right?
Absolutely.
It's the first thing you're doing is saying, okay, give me the logs on this. Let me see, what's happening from the security log. Let me see what's happening from the application log. Let's see what's going on this machine at the very base level before we start doing anything using the F word, right? And F being forensics, right? Before we start doing anything like that, right, we really just take that base analysis and look at that. And you know, the next step, if you start to talk about, you know, forensic analysis and really even jumping into IR sort of functionality, right, is you start to look at the registry. What's going on with the registry? What, you know, what's all the processes and this sort of things that we want to do. And this is what you can do with packages, is simply go out and say, grab the logs, right? Grab the logs, dump the registry, and pull it back. And again, at the endpoint, you're able to blast that package out and pull that back really easily. So if you follow the scenario that Jack and I brought up, where you have an interesting scenario that happens, then from there, you go through and grab, you say, all right, let's blast it out. Let's do an InSecurity. Let's see where else this is happening. Oh, wow, look at that. That's happening at 10 or 12 or 14 or 15 other, you know, devices. Let's then go out and simultaneously blast out a package that brings back those logs. So you're, instead of going from one machine to another machine to another machine, you're essentially blasting those out with packages. Now, the next section behind that, and again, kind of rushing through this because we're running out of time, which if you could put guys like me and Jack on the line, I mean, no one should be surprised. That said, with the playbooks, this is how you can say, listen, when we see action A, B, or C, or this particular application hit, right, or this scenario is built up, then go execute that package. We use these packages and playbooks in all of our IRs. Right? This is how we do our forensic gathering and things like that when all possible. When we can get optics onto the device, this is what we're using. Right? So again, great features that you can utilize, and what, you know, the thing I really wanted to bring up is that when we're talking about these best practices, this is not super secret ThreatZERO juju, right? Or anything that's, you know, that is, you know, tightly held secrets that are, you know, that are held close within the, you know, the bowels of silence. This is all stuff that is out on our support portal. So you know, Summer let these out there, and these are, Summer, you know, kind of pointed us to those in the beginning of the webinar here. But you know, these links are taking you to exactly the best practices that I'm talking about. So again, these are things that you can go and you can leverage on your own. So really, as we're running out of time, and I want to do a quick wrap up, you know, Jack, first and foremost, thank you so much for your valuable input. You know, really, you know, where our customers really leverage the power of, you know, prevention and optics. It's a portrait of what you're doing. So thank you so much for your insight and, you know, sharing that with us. And that said, I wanted to give you the floor kind of one last time, you know, for some more of this great input, and really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you. I am glad to be here. One thing as you were speaking about packaging and playbooks that I always made a note to myself, the day after you guys came, the next thing that we did immediately, whenever we have any risky situations, we pull the browser cache and the hives, because those are so typical of a landing zone and a dump of malware content. And I mean, we're like little school kids, quite excited about it. So we immediately put that feature to use, and it was infinitely valuable. In general, the two things I wanted to make sure to mention to everyone is the communities that Cylance offers are excellent. Please sign in, participate. There is so much to be learned from each other and sharing, and so many people come up with answers or offer each other answers so readily in there. Please participate there. And also the knowledge base. Anytime, especially when I've been in EA, that I need to know something new, you know, or to consider how I might deploy a new version of Protect, you know, it was always there that I looked for it. And then finally, there is optics training online. Please, you know, there's so much, optics has so many moving parts. Go there, take the training. It will reveal so much. I just can't tell you how valuable it's been to me.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate both of your time very much. And I'll try to keep everything going pretty quick, everyone. As Jack mentioned, we do have some upcoming stuff Our next user group has been announced. It's going to be at Cylance HQ in Irvine. It will be at 6 p.m. on June 13. If you're in the Irvine area or you plan to be in Irvine, you can go to our Cylance user group space in the community and let me know, or you can register at our Cylance user group's landing page, which you can access through the link. It'll be in the slides when we post them. Or you can go to cylance.com resources user groups at any time to see when the next one's going to be and if it's going to be in your area. That gets updated as soon as we go live with one. If you want to speak at a user group or host us, that would be great. Just shoot us an email at usergroups@cylance.com, and that's going to go to me and we'll get it done. Just to let you know, just a really quick couple of next steps. You can access the community portal from your Protect console. You can either log into your console and go to Help FAQ, or if you're logged in, you can just go to support.cylance.com and it'll take you there. This is a great place to go, like Jack said, to get assistance, to engage with your peers and just talk about technology or the product itself, or to post questions if you need a little hand. You can also go there in about 72 hours, just to reiterate, this webinar recording and slides will be posted to the general discussion space, and you can review it there, post additional questions, access all of the resources that Dave and Jack mentioned and myself. And we've also got some great upcoming webinars this May. That'll be on cylance.com/webinars. If you need account support, contact your executive or your technology business partner, or you can call 844-CYLANCE or email sales in order to get that assistance. We are here to help. Our next customer webinar is planned for May 30th, 2019 at 9 a.m. I hope we get to see you all there. And until then, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope the rest of your day is a great one.